Once upon a time, you used to be mine. Birds and bees and apples and trees, the world's a perfect design. Do it all so well and you know it. Let your light shine, you know you show it. Mercy, joy, and success. Every day's a chance for happiness. Yes, we can live a beautiful, crazy plan. Every day's a celebration. Every day's a celebration.
Welcome to the Great Song Adventure. We have something really special today. And I can tell you that it was not my doing. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Louise.
Wasn't this a great surprise for us? Because we've been doing these episodes now. We started last year, and we've had a lot of great interviews. I sent my mother some links and said, Paul Zollo and I are doing the Great Song Adventure. Check out this interview with Mike Stoller. Check out this archive with Chrissy Hine. And she actually suggested we interview Lou Adler, which was a great interview. And Danny Korchmar was a great interview. We've had so many wonderful things. And she called me up and said, I just want to say, I love your podcast. It's so amazing what you're doing. You're creating this historical content so that we know where songs came from. And I really, really feel I should be a part of this. I really want to do this. So she came to us, and little did we know that we were going to have over 5 hours of conversation with our guest.
Our guest, who's your mom, also a wonderful songwriter and historic, Carole King. And yeah, people would just assume, well, of course Carole King did it. You know, Louise must have insisted, but we weren't going to ask her because it's really not something she's doing hardly any of. She's doing very few interviews, if ever, right?
And historically has never been a fan of interviews, as you probably know. I can tell you that I have insisted many times on things and still she'll say no. So I've learned to respect her way. And
yeah, people might not know, but she's moved out of Los Angeles. She lives away from here. She doesn't really want to participate too much in the music business these days, correct?
Yeah, she was never that interested in participating in the music business beyond the point of when she was trying to get songs cut from different artists. But when she was an artist herself, she really wanted to maintain as much of a normal life as possible and never wanted to be a road dog. She never wanted to stay on the road longer than it was fresh for her. And she talks a lot about how life was what kept her grounded, living real life, not being away from what normal people do.
Yeah. Being a performer was obviously not her main goal in life. She was a great writer and an amazing writer and a great singer and producer as well of her own stuff. But being a performer was not her main thing like it is for so many famous artists.
Yeah, she never considered herself a producer. She never wanted to produce. She loved giving that job to Lou Adler.
Which Lou even said. It said it was all there. I'd like to take credit, but it's all there in those songs. That's one of the obvious reasons those songs stand up to this day, because they were so amazingly constructed.
Yes. And he did say in the interview that he felt his job was to protect that, you know, and she knew that. She felt protected when she was working with Lou. The other thing I love about these interviews is she and I talk all the time, and sometimes she'll come over and I'll show her something and she'll go over to the piano and we'll get creatively excited and go, oh, what about this? Talk about different songs, how it works. And it's very hard to translate that outside of a private setting because she's guarded usually if someone's asking something in a professional setting where there's cameras or microphones on. I mean, I really do think that this is the most relaxed and expansive interviews I think I've ever known her to do in her entire career.
Yeah, I got to say, it's quite remarkable how much she shared. And it was the dynamic of having Louise there, her beloved daughter. I felt so lucky to get to be there with the two of you because she brought a warmth and a love to it because you're there and the two of you were so close. It was really special. And yet she talked about everything. I mean, she talked about the business. She talked a lot about your dad, Gerry Goffin, a lot, and with great respect, but also, the parts that were tough being with him. And boy, it's quite a remarkable interview. I got to interview her 30 years ago in 1988, and that was great, but it was much more on the craft. And frankly, I was intimidated. It was Carole King after all. But this, it was just so relaxed and wonderful. And she had a lot to say. It was so exciting to be part of it.
A lot to say. Talking about her level of excellence, that's something that I've always known about her. And it's not perfectionism, because perfectionism isn't really excellence. There's a lot of fear in perfectionism, like I can't show any flaws. But she's always had an amazing work ethic. And my father did too. When it came to songwriting, they were working class songwriters. And I think that's why the work stands the test of time.
Absolutely. And that comes from a reverence for songs. What makes a song great? Great melodies, which we talk about, great chord changes, which is part of who she is so much, and great words, the use of words and your dad, and great titles and concepts, all of it. Even songs your mom says were kind of painful for her in life. Still, she wrote them because they could be good songs. So the song would come first. And also that reverence shows itself when this starts, before she knew you were actually taping. And she was just playing a song she loved, which is Rodgers and Hammerstein, Hello, Young Lovers, on the piano, and just trying to remember the chords. And it was so beautiful because I could see that's where she came from, those rich, sophisticated chords with beautiful melodies. So, that led, and he mixed that with some rock and roll, and out of the other side could be a Carole King, Gerry Goffin kind of song.
Yeah, that was her roots. And I know that my grandmother did a lot of musicals. When I was a kid, my grandmother used to, in the summer times, my grandparents lived in Connecticut at a place called Lake Wabeeka, and my mother's mother would direct musicals in the community house in that very East Coast way. And I was very young, but I remember, she would put on productions of The King and I, which is where that song is from.
Yeah.
And West Side Story, and direct them. So, yeah, she was raised with musical tunes and Guys and Dolls.
Yeah, great melodies, but rich, adult chords, as I like to call them. But, those Carole King chords, they're sophisticated. That's one thing your dad said. Like, her songs were always sophisticated. They were a little different, often rock and roll, but always with something extra musically.
So you had the benefit of talking to my father as well. Were the two of them together in the interview?
No, they were separate. We did it the year where I first met you in 1988, when we, as part of the National Academy of Songwriters, did a salute to Goffin and King. And then separately, I interviewed him. I interviewed your mom on the phone and your dad at his home. But they're together in my book, Songwriters on Songwriting. They're next to each other, those interviews. But they both had so much respect and love for each other, and that comes across in this interview so much. I was always so impressed by that, how generous your mom is. Some songwriters aren't that way with their partners often, but your parents did not seem to have any problem, praising the other and recognizing the other's genius.
It was definitely the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Yeah, they did make each other better. I'm curious what some of the things that my father would have said 30 years ago in that interview.
It was fun. And then he played chess with me, and he beat me in 5 moves. And he said, you can play me anytime.
Yeah, he taught me opening gamuts when I was 8 years old. I used to love playing chess with him.
He was good chess player. Well, should we hear it? We have so much. We've split it into 5 episodes.
Yeah, we do. And they're all focused a little differently, but I'm excited. So here we go, part 1. And today is my mother's birthday, actually.
Yes, so that's a perfect time to start.
Yeah.
And this one is the one that starts right with the piano. This is her, kind of sounding out and playing the chords of Hello, Young Lovers. And you sing along, too, somewhat.
I think I was trying to. I don't know if I know the song so well. But today she's turning 77.
Yes.
And at the time of this interview, she said, I keep forgetting, but I'm still 76. Happy birthday, Mom.
cry. This song makes me cry. That is the lyrical inspiration for City Street. Let's talk about
For
that.
City Streets?
I don't have the chords exactly right.
Is that what that was, Rodgers and Hammerstein? I was
Oh,
wondering.
yes. We will not talk anymore about this until we're recording.
Yeah, we're recording. I've been recording the whole time.
It's like Richard Nixon. Well, as you probably know, I've met a lot of music journalists that don't know much about music at all. Have you found that they ask you questions that are sometimes just uninformed about music?
I don't mind if they're uninformed about music, but I do mind when they ask questions that have been asked a million times. Some of my best interviews, my most fun interviews as the interviewee, because I also like to interview people, as you will find out, are when we're having a conversation and I learn things and they learn things and everybody consequently listening learns things.
Well, that was really nice to hear that, because I was reading the interview we did 30 years ago, and you said one of the things you do when you just want to get going, you play someone else's songs. But I never got to ask you what you would play. And
Oh, it can be anything. I just played Hello Young Lovers. I was just noodling around because on the way over here in the car I was thinking, I was trying to remember the chords because that song was really formative as one of many. Richard Rodgers was probably one of my earliest musical influences, and he wrote a lot of great songs with Larry Hart and then later with Hammerstein, Oscar Hammerstein Jr. or the second or something. I don't remember the exact suffix. But my mother used to take me to see Broadway shows, and I think I saw South Pacific. I'm pretty sure I saw The King and I, and but we had the soundtrack albums. And what I loved about Richard Rodgers' melodies and chords were how naturally they flowed, and you can feel that in my songs because I love chords. I love having a simple melody that flows with lots of chord changes underneath it, but you're not really aware, and I'm not when I'm writing it. It just sort of happens. But I love chords. That is probably, people say, well, how do you start a song? And I know you were going to ask that. No, I'm kidding.
I probably was going to get that.
But, I mean, this is one of the questions. How do you,
Where do you start?
what comes first, the music or the lyrics?
That's it.
That's the question I've probably been asked the most in my life, which I'll bet you two as songwriters have also been asked that a lot, yes?
Well, there's always the answer, the phone call.
That's the Sammy Kahn joke. Which comes first, the phone call? You get an assignment.
That's great.
That's Sammy.
And we'll come back to assignment in a minute, but the concept of what comes first, I think for me, when I am completely blank, when I am a completely blank slate, first thing that comes out is a chord. If, for example, I'm not a completely blank slate when there's a lyric on the piano, which was the case when I wrote with Toni Stern, she always gave me a complete lyric first. Which, for example, it's too late. You look at this lyric, I looked at the lyric, and I play an A minor chord, and I go, stayed in bed on my ninja. And it flowed out. Tony's lyrics had that unique quality. It was just complete on the page. The meter was all there. It just made it so easy. Gerry Goffin often gave me a first verse. Sometimes a chorus. But again, if I have a lyric.
But he'd just give you a fragment, just enough to get going. Huh? And then
he'd give me something, but not always. Sometimes I would write a melody, and I have not been able to remember, and unfortunately Gerry is no longer here to ask, and Louise was too young to remember. But the Broadway musical, Beautiful, depicts that Gerry gave me a lyric, and he's sleeping on the couch after writing all night, and I come down in the morning and I set it on the piano. This is in the musical. I'm not very linear. I'm going to jump to an aside on that one. the way that it was portrayed in the musical, it's been done this way by every female actor that has played me. And that's in part because of direction and in part because of the book, because that's what's called for. But that is one of the few times I've ever seen the depiction of what it's really like to write a song done so realistically. I swear I'll come back to things I started, but what I was getting at with this story is when I sit at the piano and there is a lyric or there's nothing, you don't know what's going to come out. And so what you do is kind of tentative. You don't sit down and play your completed song as a complete thing because you don't know what it's going to be when it comes out. And it starts to come out, and the way they depict it in the musical is just like that. The actor sits down, actress, female, whatever, Carole sits down and starts tentatively, "Tonight you're mine, completely." And then she just gets going on it because she thinks, and what comes next just comes. It just comes when you're doing it. Again, you two are songwriters. You know that. People who write books know that. People who play music and are composing know that. It's a thing where you start and something takes you over and your channel is open to receive. And then you get the hang of it. And then you know what it's going to be, kind of.
Is that accurate in the musical? Is that how
it
it
is so happened? Perfectly done. I cannot tell you.
What really happened in real life?
Well, like here's the thing. Yeah. Back to real life.
Will You Love Me Tomorrow is in the musical.
Will You Love Me Tomorrow is in the musical, and it's done so well because they create the song, and then it flips the set, and then there are the Shirelles performing it. But in my recollection, Gerry was at work. He worked as a chemist. That was his day job. And in my recollection, I think I wrote the music first, or at least the first verse. But then again, I may be mixing that up with Up on the Roof, which I definitely wrote the music for.
Okay,
first.
I have a memory.
You did?
I did.
Story, I always remember.
At least the verse.
Maybe we've seen the musical so often now that it's like, which is the real thing? But the story I always heard for years of Will You Love Me Tomorrow is that you needed a song by tomorrow.
Correct.
He was working. You wrote the music. Now, I'm not sure if you were using reel-to-reels at the time, but that you left him. Would you have left him a reel-to-reel?
No.
How would you have left a piece of music for him to
Well, I
listen to?
wouldn't have. I think your recollection is correct. That's what I'm saying. I think I started the music, and he
then
came
you gave
home
him a
from
note.
work.
With a note saying, we need this by tomorrow.
Well-
That's what I always heard, and that the note said, we need this done by tomorrow.
Oh, and that's what triggered his lyric?
Tomorrow. That's what
Well, I might have left a note because I might have gone out shopping or something, but I didn't leave it for him in any
because
form.
you didn't have a form to
We
leave
didn't
it.
have a form to leave it in. I might have gone out, with my babies or baby at the time, shopping or something. In any event, I very much have this recollection, and I didn't want to be mixing it up with Up on the Roof because that I know I wrote. I remember writing dun 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 dun, and when this song, the music, da 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 da, and he came home and filled in the blanks.
Pretty well.
That's a puzzle.
But apparently, I'm pretty sure, and your recollection coincides, that he also did that with Will You Love Me Tomorrow. Now, the thing about assignment, let's see, I remember.
But before you jump to that, I gotta say, Gerry said Up on the Roof was his favorite of all. He loved
Really?
that. Yeah, and also because it was true, and that he went up on the roof and to get in touch with it, yes?
He did go up on the roof, but we didn't live in a place with a roof. It was a sort of a two-family house with the upstairs having 2 floors and a bigger family, and we had the ground floor apartment, which consisted of 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen.
So he didn't go on the roof? There was
Not
no
in
roof?
that house,
Oh,
but
I
I'm
thought
sure that as a
I pictured
kid.
it.
No, I'm sure maybe in Jamaica he did that. Jamaica, Queens, he might have done that. But he definitely had that in his history, and anyone who lived in Brooklyn or Queens pretty much knew that experience.
Yeah, he says where he could get away from the city, where it was quiet for him.
Well,
somewhat.
whatever he wrote, right? He also wrote Pleasant Valley Sunday. This was also true. But I'm jumping ahead. But let me go back to Assignment, which relates to both songs, by the way, Up on the Roof and Will You Love Me to 3 songs, and Pleasant Valley Sunday, and so many others. We did write on assignment. And initially, when we were given assignments, we wanted the money. We were, Gerry was working that job.
Sure.
I was either pregnant or had already had Louise. And so, and Gerry was like, yeah, we need the money,
What was the money? $25?
Exactly that amount.
25 for the
Louise is steeped in our family
for the
law.
publisher to accept it. What was
$25, yeah.
Just to,
Write
for
a
the,
song. And they took the publishing?
yeah.
it? Completely?
Yeah. I mean,
So,
yes,
All
they
the
took
music.
all the publishing, but in those days, and maybe still today, I'm not even following it anymore because I haven't been writing for a while. But in those days, if the publisher took the whole song, the publisher had half or owned the copyright, but we got half the royalties. That's how it worked.
I always had this idea
So
that
it
you
split
guys.
down the middle. So if we made, as I remember the number very well, we made a penny per unit sold of Will You Love Me Tomorrow. So every time somebody bought a single, it was singles then, we made a penny. No, a penny was distributed, or maybe it was 2 cents, and we got a penny. That's what it was. The whole publisher share was 2 pennies, and we got one of them.
I had this impression that Gerry and you stopped working, and then were doing that. But he was working. You were both working while working.
Oh,
lunch.
I wasn't working because I was the stay-at-home mom, or I was pretty much a mom most of the time.
But the chemist job went while you were a professional songwriter as well.
I mean, the part in the musical goes by really quickly, but when we made, I think it had sold 10,000 units or a million units, and that was $10,000. I don't remember what it was, but all of a sudden he could quit his day job, and that was momentous.
Yeah, from Will You Love Me Tomorrow, from that song?
Yes, that was the one that put us over. But this all sounds really crass and monetary and everything. And
No.
Gerry was the family provider. He was more concerned about making sure we had enough money because he was the family provider. I was just there like, what do I need to do here? Oh, we need to write a song. Oh, okay, the baby's crying. I've got to go take care of the baby. I was 18 years old and a mom, which was insane. But I was out of high school. I had graduated high school at 16, so I wasn't a high school mom. But
Then you went to Queens College at some point, right?
that was where I met Gerry. So, yeah, after
1958.
high school.
But you also knew, before Gerry, if I had this right, you knew Paul Simon before you met Gerry, right?
I knew Paul Simon. We never wrote together. We never dated. We never did anything except hang out and play music together and help each
together,
other on our demos.
Did you make demos? Is that true?
We did make demos. That was sort of our thing. And Paul reminds me that we were known as the Cousins, which I could not have told you on a bet.
The Cousins?
The Cousins. I don't know why, but he said we were known. He asked Paul when you interview him, but he said we called ourselves the Cousins, and we do demos and we get a little fee.
And if I got it right, he played guitar and bass, and you played piano and drums too. Is that right?
No way did I.
No
play
drums?
No way did I ever play drums.
I've been telling that for 30 years. That you played drums. on
No,
this.
there's no way that I ever played drums, even rudimentarily enough to fake it.
Okay.
Louise plays drums. I cannot play drums.
I have a question, because you were talking about the motivation to write a song was to make the $25, then it was motivated then by that. So later, how much was the songwriting propelled by the hunt for a cover, or rather by the song for its own entity? Because I know you have this thing, you say you like to write for the gods, play for the gods. There's no necessarily end result in mind.
Playing for the gods and writing with the gods. I don't do that for the gods. I play for the gods. Sometimes I'll just sit down and feel like playing, and stuff will come out of me, and I'm watching it come out, and I know that A, I'm playing for the gods, B, they're driving me. And almost always when I do that, I end up crying, very emotional, because it's such a powerful connection. Nothing else is happening in the world except that connection. Now, that does sometimes happen when I write a song. I remember much later on, I wrote the song Safe Again, which, by the way, I wrote in 2001, but before 9/11, which is bizarre. I also wrote I Feel the Earth Move before the 1971 earthquake.
That came on your birthday.
That came on my birthday after I had written the song. So I'm not writing any more disaster songs ever. Safe Again was one of those songs that I sat at the piano and I don't know where it came from. I don't know what was in my mind, what triggered it. But that song, by then we had a tape recorder. So I turned that on and that's what I call a docu demo. That's when the thing is coming out and you have something rolling. Now we have voice memos, but you just have something rolling and you hear that which I described earlier, that tentative. Seems so hard. All I want to do is play out in the yard. I want to be safe again. And I realize I got something. And I keep going. And words come along with the music. And it just came. Some songs do that. Others you have to stop and go, okay, well now I have a verse and a chorus. I need to write a second verse and it has to fit into these spaces and this meter because I've already created verse 1. Mm-hmm. Those were the rules. And you could break the rules, but they made sense. So most of the time I did it. And there are forms. Sometimes, I don't know if any of your other people have talked about this, the AABA form, which is Will You Love Me Tomorrow? You have a verse that ends with the title line. Mm-hmm. You have a second verse that ends with a variation of the title line. Then you have the bridge or the middle 8, which goes in a different direction. And then you end with the last verse. So it's AAB is the bridge and then A. Mm-hmm. They're just random letters to say that two of the same, a different thing. Mm-hmm. And then
instead of a regular chorus, the title is in the verse.
Yeah, the title is at the end of the verse, and often there'll be a form where it's ABAB and a bridge, and the last thing, whatever that is, which often is the B for me.
What's a pre-chorus in that?
No, well, that I was just thinking that. Then you have a pre-chorus, which is you might have a verse, and then there's a setup to the chorus, which is the pre-chorus, and then the chorus. And there's so many ways you can do that, and so many things you can do, given that you start out that way. And one of the things I love to do is take the song on a journey, let it go on a journey. So, for example, let's say I start with let's take an A-B with pre-choruses in between the A's and the B's. So you have a verse, you have the setup for the chorus, and you have the chorus. And then there are different ways you could go. You could go right to a bridge there, and then you can come back to a verse and a chorus. Or you could do another verse and skip the B section and go right to the chorus and then do a bridge. And a lot of times I will take a journey in the bridge, and this is where chords come in for me, because sometimes I'm in a sort of basic chords and then I'll modulate to some other key. Mm. And one of my greatest joys as a songwriter is wandering off into another key and saying, how the F are you going to get back to the original key? Sometimes it's accidentally, sometimes I struggle and I just go, okay, what is the thing? And then it just, sometimes just by singing it, you feel where it needs to go.
I felt the melody lead you.
The melody, because the melody is the string that's consistent. You want it to have, a melody wants to be, for me, almost conversational, like natural. It should flow. But the chorus.
I said that to you when I was 8.
You did?
I have that memory. I remember this really well in our house on Wonderland Avenue, and I said to you, Mom, are melodies to songs in the tune that you would say it in? And you went, how did you know that?
Well, you have incorporated it well.
And I got to say, talking about the form of Will You Love Me Tomorrow, I was listening to it today, and it's just one of those songs, kind of like Rodgers and Hammerstein.
How basic is it?
Well, To me, it just seemed perfect. Just like one of those songs that's been in my life that it seemed perfect. But I was really listening to the words, number one, like, of the bridge. They're just beautiful. It's poetry.
Oh,
it's just
Gerry,
beautiful, elegant words.
Gerry
and with words unspoken. That's beautiful.
Gerry had the gift, and first of all, I knew that he had a gift, but I didn't realize how great the gift was until much later. But he had a gift for taking the most simple words and expressing profound concepts. I mean, if you take all those words, there's no fancy words, there's no fancy rhymes.
That's the big lesson of listening to his songs and his lyrics is there's nothing extra. Everything's essential. And that's how he was. He distilled things to their essential emotions. I mean, as a man and a conversationalist, I mean, as you know, he wasn't a man of many words. He was very pensive, and he thought deeply about what he was going to say before he said anything, and whatever came out of his mouth was something that he really thought through. So whatever came out of his mouth in life, and it could just be, how you doing? You know, but he meant it. He meant that, how you doing? Like, he meant, I've really been thinking about you. And so, yeah, and he would listen to your response. He cared. And we don't live in a society that does any of that right now.
Well, for the most part, I mean, there are still many people who are like that. They're called introverts.
Well, partially you have to get away from noise.
Yes.
You have to get away from noise to know your thoughts, and you have to be asking yourself questions and thinking about life to be that. And that goes into songs. Yeah.
But you say getting away from noise. An interesting thing about Gerry, as you know, is there was always noise in his head. His mind was full of noise. He was thinking about so many things.
Thinking about politics, regret, things that happened 30 years ago.
But that's later. I'm talking about even then. I mean, I remember him. He was obsessed about what had happened with Hitler and the Nazis. And,
was he?
And yes, I mean, he identified very strongly as being Jewish. And he was obsessed about how horrible that was and what an injustice was. And he was a very, very sensitive person. I mean, this is before the mental illness came upon him and everything. He was deeply sensitive. He was driven. I mean, he was in part driven by money, as I mentioned, because he was the provider of our family, and that was really important to him to succeed at that. But he was also driven by these concepts of justice and what was right and what was fair and you know, the things. I still think about those things, but the way he did, it was in his head all the time. And so when he wrote a song, in my view, because you know him certainly as well as I do, except, you know, you didn't know him as well as a person to person when he was very young. And that was when he was the most dynamic. There's still there's a tape of us, he'd say, no, you gotta do it this way. And he was talking fast as opposed to slow in his later life. But he was driven. And yet when he had to write a song, so focused, which brings it down to why were his words so simple and to the point. It was that focus.
You know, they were simple, but they were perfect. I mean, the meter, the phrasing, it's perfect. The rhyme, the bridge of "Will You Love Me Tomorrow," perfect. You know, every line rhymes.
Yeah. It's
beautiful craft as well as the art of it, of course.
And then the competition with Barry and Cynthia, because Cynthia is also a wonderful, brilliant lyricist. And she's a slightly different style. She can be cleverer. And yet, if you look at her lyrics, she has the same gift. She just gets right to the point. One of my favorite lyrics of all time. Just a little loving early in the morning beats a cup of coffee for starting out the day. What could be better? I mean, so... It's
interesting you mentioned them as your composers, but they're the other people, but was it mainly
it was totally the two couples, I mean, as depicted in the musical. And Gerry knew how great Cynthia was as a lyricist, and we both knew how great, you know, Barry. I would listen to things Barry would write. Barry is a much more sophisticated writer musically than I am.
Really?
Yeah, I'm simpler. I'm more in the Richard Rodgers mode.
That's simple.
That was not simple what you played, and
No.
Beautiful is not simple.
Well,
I'm more of a guitar guy, but playing your songs, they're not simple because there's all these alternate bass notes and
Yeah, exactly.
stuff for guitar people. It's like,
so let me jump to James. We're jumping around time zones here, but James Taylor was... It's so funny. He says he was influenced by me, which I'm sure is true. I was older. We had hits and all of that.
very influential.
In turn, I listened to Tapestry next to Mudslide Slim and Sweet Baby James. It feels like one album to me. I was so heavily under his influence. You've Got a Friend. I wrote. That was another song like Safe Again that just came out of me.
Yeah, you had mentioned that. The whole thing came out, right?
It just came out, and I don't think I had a tape going, and I remember thinking on one level as it's happening, dear God, don't let me forget that. I wrote that in time to record it for Tapestry, which was recorded in 70, I think, early 71.
Did you say you were thinking of James when you wrote it or influenced by him?
Well, I must have been influenced by him because, and I'll tell you what else, if you listen to it, you just call out my name, right? Trains and boats and planes. La, 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 la. That was in my head in some weird way because when I heard it come out, I was like, oh, I hope this isn't like, a copyright thing. But that was in my head, and James's lyrics were kind of in my head, but generally, I don't know.
How about his voice? I mean, he famously did this song.
I did not hear his voice singing it. I didn't know he was going to record it. And by the way, there are two different stories on that. James says that he heard me doing it at the Troubadour, and he asked me if I could use it, if he could record it. And I very generously said, yes, that's James's story. Mm-hmm. My recollection is different, and we both have agreed to have our separate recollections both be true. But my recollection is totally different. He may have asked me, I don't remember. And if he had,
I've heard Peter Asher tell a story, so I'm curious what your story is.
My story is we were at a session at which, so Peter Asher has the same story. Well, James's memory of that time may have been colored by other factors. But my recollection is that I was playing piano on one of his recordings, I think from Mudslide Slim, maybe, whatever his next...
I love that album too. That's a wonderful album.
It was all one continuous thing. Sweet Baby James, he recorded in London, I think.
No. He recorded in Hollywood.
Oh, no, he did, because
the
I
Apple
played
album
on it.
he did
Hello.
in London.
I played on it.
The previous album that he did with Apple, was in London.
Right. So Sweet Baby James and
was that A&M or
Sunset Sound?
Sunset. But we bounced back and forth between Sunset and A&M because we were doing, I think, Sweet Baby James first, and then I did Tapestry, and then he was doing Mudslide Slim by that time. At any rate, the story is I was playing on that session, and Peter said, let's go into the control room. And he said, I want to play you something. And I hear You've Got a Friend, recorded by James and that band. I wasn't on it. For the first time. And it was one of two songs of mine that were recorded that I was like, okay, I'm done. I don't have to have anything else happen in my life.
Wow. The other
being
Aretha, perhaps?
What's that?
Aretha Franklin?
Aretha, perhaps, indeed. There's a whole...
That would be a good one.
There's a whole chapter in my memoir about that experience of how Jerry Wexler pulled up. Jerry and I are walking on Broadway. He pulls up in his car. Is in a limo, and the window rolls down, and he says, hey, come over. And Jerry and I walk over, and he says, I got a title for you. I want you to write this for Aretha. And he says, Natural Woman. And we're like, okay. And we drove home. We were living in New Jersey by then, and we listened to WNJR. And that was the rhythm and blues station. And we just infused ourselves. I mean, we were aware of rhythm and blues and gospel and all of that before, but we infused ourselves with it. Mm. And then I just, went and started this. And Gerry I think he had written some of the lyric first, so it just came out, but it was that, slow 6/8. And I'm jumping all over the map.
So this was Waddington Avenue that you wrote that?
Yes, that was on Waddington Avenue.
When we lost Aretha, that was the main song they kept playing. It's like her signature song, Natural Woman. And I just thought, that's so great that it came from you.
The other one being Respect. Both lyrics were written by men. Otis Redding wrote Respect.
Jerry Wexler got full credit on that song, didn't he?
He got a third credit, and deservedly.
Just for the title.
Amazing. Hell yes.
But Ringo never got title credit.
Not my problem. No, that was a brilliant title.
That's generous.
He deserved the credit because he suggested that title, and that evoked a whole song.
Well, that's the end of part 1 of our interview with your mom, Carole King, part 1 of 5. And I love we end talking about that Natural Woman because we just lost Aretha recently, and you knew Aretha, and she's saying, Natural Woman, that became her theme song, such a great song. And when she died, they played that song a lot on TV, especially when she was singing at the Kennedy Center Honors with your mom there. That was a really special moment to see. But I always thought it was so generous of them that they wrote the song. But Jerry Wexler came up with the title, Natural Woman, just suggested the title, and he got full writing credit on that. Something Ringo Starr came up with many of the titles, like Hard Day's Night. He never got writing credit, which I mentioned. Your mom said, not my fault.
Yeah, then they are a part of the song. The song wouldn't exist without them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But songwriters aren't always that generous with the credit, even so.
Well, as far as Aretha goes, I didn't know Aretha, but I did get to sit next to her at the Kennedy Center Honors. And I had this huge voice in my head the whole time saying, if my father was here right now, what would he want to say to Aretha? And I got this message very strongly, thank her for singing Natural Woman. So I just turned to her and I said, Aretha, my father isn't here right now to speak for himself, but I feel if he was, he would want me to thank you for singing his song. And she just looked at me and said, you're welcome.
Well, it was a great gift to her, too, to have such a great song, one of the greatest songs. But also you helped her in another way, as I recall, that night. Isn't that right?
Well, yeah, I helped zip up her dress when the zipper had fallen down. She asked me if I could do her a favor and, could you get my zipper and turn around? And I did get to zip the Queen of Soul. And that was an amazing night. And, who knew that she would be gone so soon after that? Throughout my life, Natural Woman was one of those records that people would say, what's your favorite that your parents have done? And that would usually be at the top of the list. Just hearing the piano at the beginning of that record would always stir my soul.
Yeah, such a great song. I love that your mom was so excited because that Aretha played the piano on that version. That really excited
Yes,
her.
and Stephen Colbert said, oh, I wish I could have seen Aretha in her prime. And then she got up on stage and he said, boy, was I wrong.
To have any singer do your song, it would be great. But she wrote, your mom and dad wrote the greatest song for her, too. It was just a perfect song. And your mom said that was one of the greatest thrills, that and a guy named James Taylor singing You've Got a Friend, those two. And that says so much about a songwriter because Carole King, obviously one of the greatest, most popular recording artists of all time. But the songwriter gets more joy out of hearing another singer, like a great singer, do your song. There's a whole different dynamic to that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's end of part 1. We got 4 more parts coming. So
we do, and they're juicy as well. I just want to say we heard from Mike Stoller after we did the podcast episodes with him, which came in 2 parts, and he wanted us to get a couple of things out there that he didn't put in the interview or that we didn't clarify.
Yeah, which I really appreciate because our whole goal here is to get the record straight for once, because so often it's distorted. So he got 2 corrections here, which we'd like to share.
Yeah, well, one of them he did mention, but I think he wanted it to be known in its entirety that Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller produced the original recording by Benny King of the arrangement of Spanish Harlem. And the marimba part, which is used on almost every version of the song, was written by Mike Stoller. He came up with that part. But he is not a credited writer of the song.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think in the interview he said he was having dinner with his kids.
Right. I mean...
and, his priorities were right. He said, I haven't seen my kids. I'll come after. And by the time he came, they said, well, we wrote the song. But he did come up with the marimba part.
Right.
And
Phil
he's
Spector had been bugging both of them for the longest time, and finally, Mike wasn't available, but Gerry went and finished the song with them. But I always thought Mike did get credit, so I'm glad he corrected that one.
yes, it
doesn't.
is credited as Jerry Lieber and Phil Spector.
Okay.
So he's not credited, but he did come up with the arrangement
Mm-hmm.
and that part. And then there was something about his wife, Corky.
Yeah, because we talked about Corky, and I had mentioned, because she's very famous as a harpist and a great singer too, but I didn't realize she was a wonderful pianist, and she was the only female pianist to ever play with Billie Holiday, and just a great jazz pianist. And her big harp was there, so of course I talked about the harp. So Mike wanted us to remind everyone that she played piano too, and is a great singer, as well as being one of the great jazz harpists of our time. So we got that record straight, and that's what brought them together, because Mike knew of her talents. It's like, who is this? She was also beautiful, and I want to meet her. So we got that straight. So stay tuned. Happy birthday to your mom.
Happy birthday. And we have 4 more episodes coming up every week. We usually come out on a Monday. Check with us next Monday for part 2 of our 5-episode exclusive with my mom, Carole King.